The way that I raise my monarch butterflies is I like preferably to start with eggs because you have the greatest chance of actually successfully hatching a butterfly, because they many times, if you bring in caterpillars and you're raising caterpillars, they're already parasitized. So I like to start with eggs. So I'll go look out my milkweed and look for an egg. And there's many different ways to hatch the monarch eggs. The least labor intensive way I have found to hatch the eggs, and without without much intervention, is to actually have a host plant. I call it a nursery plant. It's not a plant from a nursery. I actually grew these from seed myself. There's no pesticides or anything. So what I'll do is I'll take a egg and I'll trim it down. The foliage starts to curl after it starts to desiccate or dry, so I try to trim off a considerable amount of foliage. And so I make it kind of small, and I will use the sap from actual milkweed leaf, and I'll make a little spot on the plant, and milkweed sap is very sticky and it dries, and I put the egg on there and I let it dry. See how it's windy? If I were to just set that little piece of leaf on this plant, and many times I found that the leaf would blow away, so I actually use the sap to stick it to that. And I've had upwards of 50 to 75 eggs on one host plant, and I have the greatest success with this method. There's other ways to do it too, but I like this way the best, because they hatch and they take care of themselves basically, and they don't really leave the host plant until they get really big. This is a different variety of caterpillar, but when they get real big like this is an eastern black swallowtail, they tend to wander. So then I put them in an enclosure. That's the safest way to raise them once they get big, is in an enclosure. Here, I'll open it for you so that you can have a shot. And then they pretty much take care of themselves, providing you keep fresh plant material in there for them to eat and have it, an acceptable temperature. And they will eat as much as they want until they get big and plump, and then they crawl to the top of the cage and they make their chrysalis, and they're in the chrysalis phase for about, I have found, maybe about 10 to 12 days. So from egg to caterpillar, it's about 10 to 12 days, and then from caterpillar to chrysalis, it's about 10 to 12 days, maybe 2 weeks, for them to actually grow and get plump enough. And then it takes about the same amount of time, 10 to 12 days, and then they eclose or hatch from the chrysalis into the butterfly. And I will keep them in the habitat for a few hours and they hang from the roof of the habitat. I will keep them in there for a few hours, waiting for the wings to harden, because they're very
it's almost like paper mache.
Yeah, they're not hard at all. They're very flappy. Unless it's raining hard outside, I'll wait for the rain to stop. But usually, even if it is raining a little bit, I'll just hang them from a tree outside, and they leave when they like to. So I don't really keep the butterflies. I keep the caterpillars and the eggs, and the butterflies, they get to go off into the environment and reproduce.